I had a conversation recently with a lovely lady, 73-year-old retired federal employee. She said to me, look, I've got this TSP account and I've really been feeling the ups and the downs. Overall, it's been doing well, but I'm not sure how much longer I want to put myself at risk. How should I be thinking about this? And within the context of our conversation, there was a little bit of conflict because we're talking about this TSP account and maybe reducing risk. At the same time, taking some bank CDs that are rolling over and looking for maybe higher yielding returns, right? A lot going on. And I think what we want to take away from this conversation, what I want to share with you today is, am I taking too much risk in my portfolio? What's the right way to think through this? And we can do that by just using this as context. So let's dig into it a little bit further. One of the first things she said to me was, I didn't ask this question at all. She just said, I haven't been comfortable moving my TSP account. I feel like someone's watching over it for me when it's there, which not necessarily true. There's the TSP board who, they look at the funds, make sure they're consistent, make sure they're lower cost, try to make sure the plan is functional, but no one's really looking over your account, making sure things are where they need to be. So that was one interesting point. Her situation, she was in a really nice, situation from a financial planning standpoint. She had retired on a CSRS pension that provided all the income she needed. Okay, so she hadn't had to touch this TSP, doesn't plan to in the future, hasn't had to touch any of her other investments. Also, no direct heirs, so no children, but she had some siblings that she was planning on leaving some money to about the same age as her, as well as she wanted to leave a good portion of her estate to the university she attended. So that was a big chunk of her legacy. So what's the right approach here? First of all, let's take a look at the situation. How did she get here, right? This is a nice TSP account, $900,000 in assets. She had a very long, successful federal career, and essentially she was disciplined and she invested in equities over time. And over the last 10 years, she hasn't had to take any income and the markets have been good. She's remained invested a portion of her account towards equities. So that's really how she got to where she was, consistent saving and investing, just being disciplined, right? From that standpoint, there really never is a silver bullet. All the stories you hear generally come back to these kind of concepts. Good timing is another thing too. So what is the right approach? Let's take a look at her thrift savings plan account and see what we can come up with. Now, as I mentioned, actually I didn't mention this earlier, but her account is allocated this way: 50% to the C fund, which is her growth bucket, 25% to the G fund, 25% to the F fund. So basically 50% of the assets in equity-oriented S&P 500 index, and then the other 50% in two conservative buckets, okay? So I think this is a completely suitable approach for her. And here's why. If something changes in her situation, something unexpected, she has expenses and just whatever it is, she needs income, she needs a significant amount of money for, she's got 50% of this account to fall back on, right? We know the G fund is not guaranteed, but it's pretty close. The F fund does have some sneaky risks, but it's still a conservative bucket. For whatever reason, we were in a market correction when she needed income or things changed. The falling back on these two buckets would allow her the time for the C fund, this bucket, to recover, right? How do you get to determining the right investment mix? And I think a couple of factors we're going to look at. The first thing we never want to look at is your age, because that's not really relevant to how you should be investing. What is relevant is risk, how you feel about risk. She mentioned she's not feeling the same as she used to, but maybe just providing a little context around worst case scenarios and what expectations might be could help with this. And that's what we're going to try to do here. The second thing is your time horizon. In this case, she has a long time horizon. She's not planning on using any of this for income anytime, right? And that's kind of the third thing, is need for income. So the time horizon, need for income are two things that kind of work together. And then lastly, your goals. So of course, she mentioned a legacy. She'd like to continue to grow the assets so that legacy grows as well. Your goals could be anything, and these things will be very unique and specific for you. So that's kind of the framework you can use to think through this, right? And utilizing a bucket strategy if you're in retirement, also very, very helpful. Lastly, just a couple data points to consider. When you're putting together an investment mix, you want to know what your expected returns might be, and you want to know how much risk you're taking, what the downside is. So we can look at the returns on tsp.gov for the various funds that she's in. And this can give us an idea. Of course, past performance is no indication of what the future is going to bring, but you can see here the numbers for the C fund in the middle have been pretty high, right? Since inception, which this fund is 1988, it's averaged 11%. So I would say more reasonable 9 to 10% to build into your projections. Okay, the G and the F funds, since inception, they've both been around 4.5 to 5%, as you can see here. Again, with a fixed income portion of your portfolio, maybe something a little bit lower than that, around a 4% expected rate of return. When you start accumulating these rates of return, what you can expect from the different allocations in your portfolio, then you can get to an overall rate of return that you might expect. Right? In this case, combining 50% between between the C fund and 50% in the G and the F. Gives her an opportunity to continue to see growth. Okay, so that gives you some context there. Now, her big thing was, I'm kind of feeling the ups and the downs. I don't know if I want to put myself at risk anymore. So let's talk about risk. I found this study, and we're always looking at this sort of data. How long will it take the market to recover? Okay, how long will it take your account to recover? This is an article from Morningstar. It's on morningstar.com. We know they are a big trusted source of research and numbers, and they did this study going back to 1990. They looked at all the, the markets, the corrections, every asset class, and what they wanted to do is determine the maximum time to recovery and the average time to recovery when the markets did correct. And so lots of data to our benefit here. And we can see the data for all the different asset classes. So, large cap blend sticks out there at the top, but for our friend, she was in a 50% allocation in equity. So we want to look at the 50 to 70% equity allocation. So the maximum time to recovery going back to 1990 was 4.3 years. That's how long it would take you to get back to even in your portfolio without drawing income from it. So the average time to recovery was less than that. It was less than half of a year in most cases for your money to recover. So you can kind of use this as a guidepost. And of course, there's no guarantee past performance or this data is going to tell us what's going to happen in the future, but it gives you a little bit of perspective, gives you a little bit of a guidepost to work from. All right, so now we have some perspective on what historical returns look like, what the maximum recovery time looks like if there's some sort of a correction in the markets, in the equity markets. We can use that data to help us craft the right investment mix and at least feel comfortable with where we're at. I think for this particular person, she could take a little more comfort in seeing these kind of numbers, right? Because she's been riding it out all along and maybe the ups and the downs felt a little uncomfortable, but you just need a little bit of perspective every once in a while, right? To kind of bring you back to center and say, things are going to be okay. And it looks like that, right? So with this sort of a portfolio, an expected return somewhere in the 6 to 8% range over time helps her to continue to fund those legacy goals for the charity, for her siblings. I think it's completely appropriate with the amount of money to fall back on in those conservative buckets. And plus, we haven't even talked about the CDs, right? So what are we going to do with that cash bucket? She's got more than enough. She can allow this thing to grow and run out, and then give herself flexibility options and really understand that she's not taking too much risk.